Hi, my name's Nina Tarnuzzer, and welcome to this video for the Florida Watercolor Society. Today I'm talking about Texas bluebonnets and what inspiration we might get from Van Gogh's irises in painting dark flowers across a simplified green background. I was given a commission to do these Texas bluebonnets as a full sheet, and today in the demonstration I'll be working on a quarter sheet. And I wanted to talk about my methodology on capturing these organic shapes and lovely color, rather not as a landscape far back or as botanical illustration close in, but in something kind of in a mid-view, and how one would get the viewer to move their eye through the painting with so many similar objects in the painting. So let's begin. And before we start the demonstration, I'll let you know I'm a planner. Planners plan by value studies and looking at the colors they're going to use in advance and planning out the drawing, masking sometimes in advance. I'm a planner. I like to do whatever I can to ensure or prevent problems as I progress through the painting. I have many friends who love watercolor and don't plan. They are inspirational and take their prompts as the watercolor changes on the paper. There's a very adaptive and flexible approach. It really is particularly good for those of you who paint in a loose manner. I'm more of a cellular painter, so today we're planning and I'm showing you my steps that how to plan a painting and maybe even save some office supplies. Let's start by looking at Van Gogh's irises. The iris blooms themselves are a repeated shape with variety throughout the painting, and they are arranged in groups. There is a single white iris as a focal point, and the leaves are these sharp outline shapes in a soft mint green with these very distinct outlines. Well, we're not going to do all that today, but we are going to use the design elements of shape repeated with variety and these soft mint leaves to recede. So let's look at our photograph. This is a close-up of the photo I used for the full sheet, and we're going to use as our center of interest this single flower, which is a group of these shapes, and the center of interest will be this sharp white top of this coned flower. So I want to try and get as much rotation in these and shape to these single florets, or whatever you call these lupines, these individual flowers in this entire bloom. And then we have these soft, minty, nondescript leaves in the background. I often paint from a iPad because you can manipulate the photo and blow up or add grids. It's very helpful. I often paint from black and white photos because it's much easier to see the values and compare it to a value finder, and then adjust your colors. You're free to pick whatever colors you want as long as the value's right. And so it's time to look at a value study. And I often do value studies by using tissue paper. Tissue paper over the photo or image. And this is what the value study looks like close up. And here's what it looks like. Just a simple piece of tissue paper, small. And I have blocked in the shape of the paper. We'll go with a vertical arrangement or orientation on this painting, and we will see that there is a center of interest of white and that there are darks following almost a cruciform type shape where your eye follows the whites through the painting and that the corners are less important. I wanted to take a moment to say I paint on a drafting table. So this drafting table is at an angle. So if you see shelf liner here in the corner holding brushes, these shelf liners that are kind of rubberized that grab the table also grab your brushes and keep them from sliding off. This image has a Duralar over it. If you've ever tried Duralar, you can buy it by the sheet and pads, and it's a plastical kind of paper that sheet that you can draw on, and it's useful in a number of ways. I just wanted to mention that you can check the armature of your paintings. It would, of course, these type of grids would change between the size of paintings that you would use. So you might be interested in doing a Duralar of a quarter sheet or whatever size painting that you paint frequently. And I did one for this size sheet for a demonstration to illustrate that most of the activity does seem to fall in this center diamond and then follows down to a focal point here, as well as our original plan focal point, getting pretty close to that. This is the most common point in Western paintings, is this upper left quadrant. I think it has something to do that we read from left to right. And I've also allowed some entry of the eye from the bottom of the painting to get up and move around with these whites. So now let's talk about paints, because we've got our drawing, we have it masked. Now it's time to start to select paint and brushes. I did a sample sheet of the paints that I've selected for this painting. Some that can get to very dark values, some that are beautiful but get stuck at mid values, and a selection of colors that will help us shift these colors from cool to warm, or modify them in a way to get the color that we need. For example, here is a Prussian blue, which is a very cool blue, but if you add rose, it will move very quickly to a warm blue and then into the purples. I've also run this blending line into the Viridian and included mixes with mint julep, which is an American Journey paint, and leaf green, and mixes with the lemon yellow with cerulean, and then all our selected colors with rose. It's really helpful to know what these paints are going to do before you put them on your 300-pound paper. This is Indian Throne blue, and it can be very dark, but it does have a significant color shift, so look for the color shift in Indian Throne. Okay, so those are our color selections. So let's talk about brushes. I'm going to do the underpainting with a small Princeton Neptune brush. This is probably a 1-inch, very soft, very conducive to washes on smaller pieces of paper. I like springy, tough little brushes with pointy ends, things that hold a point. Now, these are the old Lowell Cornells, which have since in the market been replaced with these King Arts. I understand one company was purchased by the other. I like rosemary sable brushes. They're very soft, hold pigments, and come to a very sharp point and are easy to work with. So there are times when I really want a springy, tough little brush, and then others where I want one that is softer and controls dropping pigment in a different way. I also want to talk about this one a little bit, since I've used a lot of masking in this painting, and that is the rosemary. This is not the right one. Here we are. This one. This is the small rosemary eradicator brush. And as you can see, this little tip is not too short, not too long, and not too hard and not too soft for moving lines where you have masked. It's really great for softening lines and edges. Great tool. So I will be using a combination of springy brushes and soft brushes, and starting off with a wash, then going to large springy brushes, and then finishing with sables and then the eradicator to refine the edges after the masking is removed. I often draw using a projector. I use a very dark pencil most of the time, and for the purposes of this demonstration I used an 8B or a 6B pencil. You can actually buy automatic pencils that come in those dark leads, and they're very convenient that you don't have to sharpen them. And in this case, I'm looking for the interesting shapes and a lot of detail to help guide me when there's a change in value and the grouping of shapes into larger shapes. Here's our drawing today. And I've actually cut out a shape of the blue bonnet as it would fit in. So let's start with the first wash. I have my value scale out, I have my paper on something where it's not going to skid around on the drawing board, and I have squeezed out some fresh paint. Now I usually do paint from a palette, but every once in a while I like to, especially with doing washes, is use a butcher's tray and mix up the paints. And when I do mix up the paints, I use a less expensive chisel brush, not my good sables or anything where I would ruin the point, to mix the paint. So let's start with cobalt, a nice true blue, and try and cover the sections that are blue. Some cerulean for some interest in changing colors. And this background is a mint, very light mint julep, paying attention that you don't get over a value 4 in this first wash. Blend to make sure that you don't get hard edges. Well, here's our painting now with the washes dried, and I've actually put in some second washes just to make them a little bit darker and more intense in purples right around this center of interest. So the contrast between the darkest dark and the lightest light will help guide the eye to our focal point. So let's get started on painting the petals. I've already have a second version here that I'm starting with putting in some of the darker darks. This isn't as dark as we're going to go. We'll probably go as dark as value 9. But I'm looking at the photo and following the organic shapes of these petals, working towards trying to build round shapes and a conical value changes to facilitate showing the shape of this flower. now we're winding down on our Texas Bluebonnet project, and here we are with the mask removed and lots of these very sharp, abrupt edges where the pigment dries right against the masking. So we're going to have to fix it, and that's where I was talking about earlier in the video about the eradicator brush, where you take a damp eradicator brush and work those edges to soften them. Keep working with your brush, just a damp brush, to move the paint that's already on the painting into the space that's blank, to have some softer edges and shaping, painting with a very excess pigment surrounding there to improve the shapes and soften those edges. And keep working on that. That's part of using masking, is that once you remove the masking, you need to work to adjust those edges. It's a good tool and saves time, but there's time on the back end. Well, as we continue to work on those edges, which you can see will take a while, I have worked on this one where I have softened these edges more and more complete on a project of softening the edges. So you can see that there are more shapes and curvature and less bright whites underneath the plant and more bright whites directionally from the light where you would expect to see true whites. I've also used a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch brush with a slurry of white gouache mixed with some leaf green to soften the background a bit. This, I thought it was too sharp, too dull, and I needed to lighten it in areas. And you're permitted to use white paint when you want to, as a glaze or however you want to, really. There are only a few societies that don't permit the admission of white paint, and if it works in what you're doing, and in this case it lightens the background, makes it matte, and pushes it further back. So I have used a white glaze here in the background. It kind of looks like this. I've also added some darker marks to anchor these plants down to the earth. I also have a handy tool that Cheap Joe's has these gems that are plastic frames so that you get a better idea of what your painting will look like when it's framed in light framing. So that's a suggestion, is to have a frame where you can help you visualize what your finished painting might look like. I keep a full-size matte backboard and acrylic sheet on my easel so that I can see what the painting will look like framed. And so this is the final painting. It's a commission, the Texas Bluebonnets, and let's get some close-ups here so you can see a little more of that detail. This was the area that we did in the demonstration. And some of the negative painting in the background. Again, I did do a gouache type wash over the green in the background to soften it. And I softened all those edges that were masked with a eradicator brush. And let's see, and went back in and made sure I got some of those really super dark values. Well, this will conclude my demonstration, and thank you for watching.